The morning sun filtered through the tall windows of Marigold Valley Elementary School, casting golden streaks across the polished linoleum floors. It was the kind of peaceful morning that Mrs. Lillian Carter had come to cherish over her 23 years of teaching. She stood at the classroom door, greeting each child with a warm smile as they filed in, their backpacks bouncing against their small shoulders, their voices filling the hallway with excited chatter about summer adventures and new sneakers. But as the children settled into their seats, arranging crayons and notebooks on their desks, Mrs. Carter noticed something unusual. A little girl she hadn't seen before stood near the back of the classroom, her hands folded neatly in front of her pale blue dress. The child had dark curls that framed a delicate face, and eyes that seemed far too serious for someone so young. Mrs. Carter glanced at her roster and saw the name: Ava Porter, age 5, new transfer student. Mrs. Carter approached with the gentle manner that had made her a favorite among anxious first-timers. She knelt down to Ava's level, her voice soft and encouraging. "Good morning, sweetheart. I'm Mrs. Carter. You must be Ava. We're so happy to have you here. Would you like to choose a seat? There's a nice spot right by the window, or maybe you'd like to sit near the reading corner." Ava looked up at her teacher with those unnervingly mature eyes and shook her head slowly. "I'm okay standing, ma'am. Thank you." Mrs. Carter felt a small flutter of concern, but kept her smile steady. Perhaps the child was simply nervous, overwhelmed by the newness of everything. "Oh, honey, you'll be much more comfortable sitting down. We have a long day ahead, and your legs will get tired. Come on, let me show you to a desk." But Ava took a tiny step backward, her small hands gripping the hem of her dress tightly. "Please, I'd rather stand. I feel better this way." There was something in the child's voice, a quiet desperation that made Mrs. Carter pause. She glanced around at the other children, who were beginning to stare and whisper among themselves. "Before we dive in, drop a comment and let us know where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. If you enjoy educational stories like this, be sure to like the video, subscribe, turn on the notification bell, and share it with someone who'd love it too." Mrs. Carter decided not to push the issue just yet. She gave Ava an understanding nod and moved to the front of the classroom to begin the morning routine. As she led the children through the Pledge of Allegiance and took attendance, her eyes kept drifting back to that small figure standing rigid near the back wall. Ava's posture was unnaturally stiff, as though she were a soldier at attention rather than a kindergartner on her first day of school. During the reading lesson, Mrs. Carter invited all the children to gather on the colorful carpet for story time. The students scrambled from their seats, eager to claim the best spots near the front. But Ava remained where she was, standing several feet behind the group. Mrs. Carter paused mid-sentence as she opened the picture book. "Ava, sweetie, come join us. You can sit right here in front where you can see the pictures better." Ava shook her head again, that same gentle but firm refusal. "I can see from here, Mrs. Carter. I'm okay." A boy named Tommy turned around and pointed at Ava. "Why won't she sit down? Is she in trouble?" A girl named Emma giggled. "Maybe she doesn't know how to sit." The other children laughed, and Mrs. Carter quickly raised her hand for silence. "That's enough. Everyone is allowed to be comfortable in their own way. Now let's continue with our story." But even as she read about the adventures of a brave little mouse, Mrs. Carter's mind was racing. Something was wrong. She had taught hundreds of children over the years, and she had never encountered a child who refused to sit for an entire morning. Not out of defiance or energy, but out of what seemed like fear or pain. During the transition to math centers, Mrs. Carter watched Ava move around the classroom. The little girl walked slowly, carefully, as though each step required intense concentration. When she bent down to pick up a dropped pencil, she did so with extreme caution, keeping her back as straight as possible and lowering herself using only her legs. It was the movement of someone much older, someone dealing with chronic pain or injury. At snack time, while the other children sat cross-legged on the floor, munching on crackers and apple slices, Ava stood beside an empty desk, eating her snack in small, measured bites. Mrs. Carter approached her again, this time crouching beside her instead of asking her to sit. "Ava, I've noticed you haven't sat down all morning. Is there something bothering you? Are you feeling sick? Does something hurt?" Ava's eyes widened slightly, and for just a moment, Mrs. Carter saw pure panic flash across the child's face. Then, just as quickly, it was replaced by that carefully constructed composure. "No, ma'am, I'm not sick. I just like standing. My mama says I have lots of energy, and sometimes standing helps me focus better." The answer was too practiced, too polished for a 5-year-old. Mrs. Carter felt her concern deepen into genuine alarm. She gently touched Ava's shoulder, and the child flinched just slightly, but enough for the teacher to notice. "Okay, sweetheart, but if you ever need anything, you can always tell me. That's what I'm here for." Ava nodded, her small face solemn. "Yes, ma'am. Thank you." As the morning progressed into art time, Mrs. Carter distributed construction paper, all glue sticks, and crayons. The children dove into their projects with enthusiasm, creating colorful collages of their favorite things. Ava stood at an empty table in the corner, carefully selecting her materials. She worked slowly and methodically, but Mrs. Carter noticed how she kept adjusting her position, shifting her weight from one foot to the other, as though trying to find relief from some invisible discomfort. Then it happened. Ava reached across the table for a red crayon that had rolled just out of reach. As she stretched her arm forward, her balance shifted. For a heartbeat, everything seemed to move in slow motion. Mrs. Carter saw the little girl's eyes go wide, saw her try to catch herself, but it was too late. Ava fell forward, and though she managed to catch herself with her hands, the momentum caused her to drop to her knees on the hard floor. The impact wasn't severe, not the kind of fall that would normally cause much more than a startled cry. But Ava's reaction was nothing short of agonizing. She let out a sharp, involuntary gasp, her whole body going rigid. Her face contorted in pain, and tears immediately sprang to her eyes. But what struck Mrs. Carter most profoundly was that Ava didn't scream or wail as most children would. Instead, she bit down on her lower lip so hard that it turned white, clearly trying with every ounce of strength to suppress the pain, to keep from crying out. Mrs. Carter was at her side in an instant, along with Mrs. Henderson, the teacher's aide. The other children stopped what they were doing, their faces reflecting confusion and concern. "Ava, sweetheart, are you hurt? Let me help you up." Mrs. Carter gently placed her hands on Ava's arms, but the moment she tried to help the child stand, Ava let out a small whimper, and tears began streaming down her cheeks. Not the normal tears of a child who had taken a tumble, but tears of someone experiencing real, significant pain. "Please," Ava whispered through her tears, her voice trembling. "Please don't look. Please don't tell anyone. I'm okay, I promise, I'm okay." But she clearly wasn't okay. Mrs. Carter's heart was pounding now, her teacher's instinct screaming that this was serious, that something was terribly, terribly wrong. "Mrs. Henderson, can you take the other children to the library for reading time? Tell Mrs. Patterson I'll be there shortly." The aide nodded, understanding the gravity in Mrs. Carter's tone. She quickly gathered the curious students and ushered them out of the classroom, closing the door behind them. Now it was just Mrs. Carter and Ava, alone in the quiet classroom with its bright bulletin boards and alphabet posters, a stark contrast to the darkness of whatever was happening here. Mrs. Carter helped Ava to her feet as gently as possible, and the child stood there trembling, still clutching the hem of her dress as though it were a lifeline. Her face was wet with tears, but she had stopped making any sound, as though even crying were something she had learned to suppress. "Ava, honey, I need you to listen to me very carefully. I'm your teacher, and my job is to keep you safe and healthy. Something is hurting you, and I need to know what it is so I can help you. Can you tell me what hurts?" Ava shook her head frantically, her dark curls bouncing. "No, I can't. Mama said I have to be brave. She said I can't tell anyone or they'll take me away. Please, Mrs. Carter, I don't want them to take me away from my mama." The words hit Mrs. Carter like a physical blow. Her hands were shaking now as she knelt down, bringing herself to Ava's eye level once more. "Oh, sweetheart, no one is going to take you away from your mama. I promise you that. But if something is hurting you, if you're in pain, I need to help you. That's what teachers do. That's what grown-ups who care about you do. Your mama would want you to be safe and healthy, wouldn't she?" Ava nodded slowly, her lower lip still trembling. "She does. She loves me so much. But we can't. We don't have. It's complicated." Mrs. Carter took a deep breath, trying to steady her own emotions. 23 years of teaching, and she had never felt quite like this, had never encountered something that sent such cold fear racing through her veins. "Ava, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me. When you fell just now, where did it hurt? Did you hurt your knees, your hands?" Ava's eyes filled with fresh tears, and she slowly shook her head. "My back. It hurt my back. But please, please don't look. The bandages might come loose and then Mama will be upset because she worked so hard to put them on and we don't have any more tape." Bandages. The word echoed in Mrs. Carter's mind. She felt her stomach drop. "Ava, you have bandages on your back, under your uniform." The little girl nodded miserably, and suddenly everything made sense. The refusal to sit, the stiff posture, the careful movements, the way she flinched when touched. Mrs. Carter felt tears burning in her own eyes, but she forced herself to remain calm, to be the steady presence this child so desperately needed. "Sweetheart, I need to see what's under those bandages. I need to make sure you're okay. Can you let me do that? I promise I'll be very, very gentle." Ava hesitated, her small body shaking. Finally, she whispered, "It's going to look bad. You're going to be scared. Everyone will be scared." Mrs. Carter reached out and gently took Ava's small hands in her own. "I'm not going to be scared of you, Ava. I could never be scared of you. You're one of the bravest little girls I've ever met. Will you trust me?" After what felt like an eternity, Ava gave the smallest of nods. Mrs. Carter's hands were trembling as she stood and guided Ava toward the teacher's desk, where there was better light. She pulled out her desk chair, but rather than asking Ava to sit, she had the child stand beside it while she positioned herself to carefully examine the child's back. "I'm going to lift your dress just a little bit, okay? Just enough to see. You tell me if anything hurts." Ava nodded again, her whole body tense with fear and anticipation. Mrs. Carter slowly lifted the hem of the pale blue dress, and what she saw made her gasp audibly. She had to bring her hand to her mouth to stifle a cry of shock and horror. Ava's lower back was covered in what could only be described as makeshift, desperate bandaging. Strips of what appeared to be torn kitchen towels, stained with yellow and brown, were held in place by masking tape that had been wrapped around the child's small torso. Pieces of newspaper had been folded and stuffed between the layers, presumably to provide additional padding or absorption. The tape itself was old, curling at the edges, and in some places it had adhered directly to the child's skin. Where Mrs. Carter could see between the layers, there were angry red marks, blisters, and what looked like burn wounds in various stages of healing. Mrs. Carter felt her knees weaken. She had to grip the edge of the desk to keep herself upright. Her vision blurred with tears, and for a moment she couldn't breathe. 23 years of teaching, of caring for children, of kissing scraped knees and wiping away tears over lost toys and hurt feelings. None of it had prepared her for this. This beautiful, brave, tiny child had been walking around all morning in excruciating pain, standing when every fiber of her being must have wanted to scream and cry and collapse. "Oh, Ava," Mrs. Carter whispered, her voice breaking. "Oh, sweetheart." She gently lowered the dress and came around to face the child. Tears were now streaming freely down her own face, and she didn't try to hide them. She knelt down once more, and very carefully, very gently, pulled Ava into her arms. The child's small body shook with sobs that she had clearly been holding back for far too long. "I'm so sorry," Ava cried. "I'm so sorry. I tried to be brave. I tried not to let anyone see. Mama said I had to be brave." Mrs. Carter held her, stroking her hair, her own tears falling into those dark curls. "You are brave, Ava. You are so brave. But you don't have to be brave all by yourself anymore. I'm here now, and we're going to get you help. We're going to make the pain go away." She held the child for several minutes, letting Ava cry, letting her release the fear and pain she had been carrying alone. When the sobs finally subsided into hiccups, Mrs. Carter gently pulled back and looked into Ava's red, swollen eyes. "Ava, I need to call the school nurse. Her name is Mrs. Bennett, and she's one of the kindest people you'll ever meet. She's going to look at your back and help us figure out how to make you feel better. Is that okay?" Ava's eyes widened with fear again. "But what about my mama? Will she get in trouble? She didn't do this to me on purpose. It was an accident. The stove, it happened so fast." Mrs. Carter felt her heart breaking all over again. "The stove? Ava, what happened with the stove?" Ava wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "It's the kerosene stove we use for cooking. Mama was making dinner and something went wrong. There was fire and it got on my dress and Mama put it out, but my back got burned. She cried so much. She kept saying she was sorry. She wanted to take me to the hospital, but we don't have the money and she was afraid they would say she's a bad mama and take me away. So she fixed me up the best she could. She stayed up all night taking care of me. She loves me so much." Mrs. Carter had to close her eyes and take several deep breaths. This wasn't a case of intentional harm. This was poverty, fear, desperation, and a mother's misguided attempt to protect her child from a system she was terrified of. It didn't make the situation any less serious, but it changed everything about how it needed to be handled. "Your mama loves you very much. I can tell, and we're not going to take you away from her. But those burns need to be seen by a doctor, Ava. They need proper medicine and proper bandages. If we don't take care of them the right way, they could get infected and make you very sick. Your mama would want you to be healthy, wouldn't she?" Ava nodded, exhaustion evident in every line of her small face. "She would. She keeps checking them every night. She's been so worried. But she works 3 jobs and we barely have enough money for food. She said the hospital costs too much." Mrs. Carter stood and walked to her desk, picking up the phone with shaking hands. She dialed the extension for the nurse's office. "Nancy, it's Lillian. I need you in my classroom immediately, and Nancy, call Principal Morrison too. We have an emergency." Within minutes, the classroom door opened and Nurse Bennett rushed in, her medical bag already in hand. She was a woman in her early 60s with kind eyes and steady hands, someone who had seen almost everything during her 30 years in school health services. But when Mrs. Carter quietly explained the situation and then showed her Ava's back, Even Nancy Bennett's professional composure cracked. "Oh, dear God," she whispered. "That poor baby." She immediately knelt beside Ava, her voice gentle and warm. "Hi, Ava. I'm Mrs. Bennett. I know you're scared, sweetheart, but I promise I'm going to be very careful. I just want to take a closer look so we can figure out the best way to help you feel better. Is that okay?" Ava looked at Mrs. Carter, who nodded encouragingly and held Ava's hand. With that reassurance, Ava nodded at the nurse. Nurse Bennett carefully lifted the dress again and began a more thorough examination. She worked in silence for several moments, her experienced eyes taking in every detail. When she finally looked up at Mrs. Carter, her expression was grave. "These burns are several days old, maybe a week or more. Some are second degree, possibly edging into third degree in a couple of spots. The makeshift bandaging has actually caused additional skin damage in places, and I'm seeing signs of infection beginning in at least 2 areas. The tape is adhering to damaged tissue. This child needs immediate medical attention, Lillian. She needs a hospital." Just then, Principal Morrison entered the classroom, a tall woman with silver hair and an air of calm authority. She took one look at the scene, the tearful teacher, the solemn nurse, the small child standing so bravely in the center of it all, and immediately understood this was serious. "What do we have?" she asked quietly. Mrs. Carter quickly explained everything: Ava's refusal to sit, the fall, the discovery of the burns, what little Ava had shared about the accident at home. Principal Morrison listened carefully, her expression growing more concerned with each detail. "We need to call 911 for an ambulance," Nurse Bennett said firmly. "These injuries require emergency care, and we're mandated reporters. We need to contact Child Protective Services." At the mention of CPS, Ava's face went pale, and she started backing away, shaking her head frantically. "No, no, no. You said I wouldn't be taken away. You promised. My mama didn't do this on purpose. She loves me. Please don't take me away from her." Mrs. Carter quickly moved to Ava's side, kneeling down and taking both of the child's hands. "Ava, listen to me. Nobody is going to take you away from your mama today. I promise you that. But you need to go to the hospital so doctors can treat your burns properly. And yes, there will be people who come to talk to your mama to make sure this kind of accident doesn't happen again. They want to help your family, not hurt it. Do you understand?" Ava was crying again, but she nodded weakly. She looked utterly exhausted, as though the weight she had been carrying had finally become too much to bear. Principal Morrison was already on the phone with 911, speaking in low, urgent tones. Nurse Bennett had pulled out some sterile gauze from her medical kit and was carefully placing it over the worst of the visible wounds, trying to provide some barrier protection without disturbing the damaged tissue too much. "We need to contact the mother," Principal Morrison said after ending her call. "Does anyone have her number?" Mrs. Carter checked her roster sheet and found an emergency contact number listed for Helena Porter. She dialed it, her heart pounding as she waited for someone to answer. It rang 4 times before a breathless voice picked up. "Hello? Miss Porter? This is Mrs. Carter, Ava's teacher at Marigold Valley Elementary. I'm calling because... Is Ava okay? What happened? Is she hurt?" The panic in the woman's voice was immediate and genuine, the panic of a mother who lived in constant fear that something might happen to her child. "Miss Porter, Ava is here with me and the school nurse. She's okay. But we've discovered that she has some injuries that need medical attention. She told us about the accident with the kerosene stove." There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line, followed by a sound that might have been a sob. "Oh God! Oh God, she told you! I knew I shouldn't have sent her to school yet, but I couldn't miss any more work. They'll fire me if I miss any more days, and if I lose my job, we'll lose the apartment. I've been checking her bandages every morning and night. I thought she was healing. I thought I was doing the right thing. Please, please don't take my baby away from me. She's all I have." Helena Porter's voice cracked completely, dissolving into desperate sobs. Mrs. Carter felt tears streaming down her own face again as she listened to this mother's anguish. This wasn't neglect. This wasn't abuse. This was poverty and fear and impossible choices that no parent should ever have to make. "Miss Porter, please try to calm down. We're not trying to take Ava away from you, but she needs proper medical care for her burns. We've called an ambulance and it's on its way. I need you to come to the school right away so you can go to the hospital with her. Can you do that?" There was a moment of silence filled only with the sound of Helena trying to catch her breath. "I'm at work. I'm at the diner on 5th Street. My shift doesn't end until 2, and my boss, he's already angry with me for the days I missed right after the accident. If I leave now—" "Miss Porter," Principal Morrison said, taking the phone gently from Mrs. Carter. "This is Principal Morrison. I understand your situation. But your daughter needs you right now. She needs her mother. We'll be here when you arrive and we'll help you through this. But you need to come now." There was another pause, then Helena's voice, small and defeated. "I'll be there in 15 minutes. The ambulance arrived first, its siren wailing up to the school's front entrance. 2 paramedics, a young man and an older woman, hurried into the building with their equipment. They were escorted to Mrs. Carter's classroom, where Ava was now sitting very carefully on the edge of a chair, Mrs. Carter on one side and Nurse Bennett on the other. The female paramedic, whose name tag read Martinez, knelt down in front of Ava with a warm smile. "Hey there, sweetheart. My name is Rosa. Can you tell me your name?" "Ava," the little girl whispered. "That's a beautiful name. Ava, we heard you have an OE on your back, and we want to help make it feel better. Is it okay if we take a look?" Ava looked at Mrs. Carter, who squeezed her hand gently and nodded. Ava then looked back at the paramedic and gave a tiny nod. As Rosa and her partner carefully examined Ava's injuries, their expressions grew increasingly serious. They exchanged glances that communicated what everyone in the room already knew. This was bad. "Okay, Ava, here's what we're going to do," Rosa said gently. "We're going to take you for a ride in our ambulance to the hospital, where there are special doctors called burn specialists. They have medicine that will help your back feel so much better. Your teacher told us your mom is on her way here, and we're going to wait for her so she can come with you. Does that sound okay?" Ava nodded again, and then in a very small voice asked, "Will it hurt when they fix it?" Rosa's expression softened even further. "They're going to give you medicine to make sure you don't feel pain while they work, and after, you'll start feeling so much better than you do right now, I promise." The paramedics prepared Ava for transport, carefully positioning her so that nothing pressed against her injuries. Mrs. Carter held Ava's hand the entire time, speaking softly to her, telling her how brave she was, how everything was going to be okay. And then they heard running footsteps in the hallway. Helena Porter burst through the classroom door, still wearing her diner uniform, her hair disheveled, her face flushed and wet with tears. She was a young woman, probably in her late 20s, thin in a way that spoke of skipped meals and constant stress. The moment she saw Ava, she let out a sob and rushed to her daughter's side. "Baby! Oh, my baby girl!" Ava reached for her mother, and Helena carefully, so carefully, wrapped her arms around her daughter, mindful of her injuries. "I'm so sorry, Mama," Ava said through her tears. "I tried to be brave. I tried not to tell, but I fell and it hurt so much, and Mrs. Carter was so nice and—" "Shh, shh, baby, it's okay. It's okay. You did nothing wrong? Nothing. This is all my fault. I should have taken you to the hospital right away. I should have found a way. I was just so scared they'd say I was a bad mother. I was so scared they'd take you away from me." Helena looked up at Mrs. Carter, Principal Morrison, and the nurse, her eyes red and desperate. "I love my daughter more than anything in this world. I would never hurt her. The stove. It malfunctioned and there was fire and I tried to stop it, but it happened so fast. I've been treating her wounds the best I could with what we had. I've been changing the bandages twice a day, making sure they were clean. I used antiseptic ointment from the drugstore. I thought I was doing the right thing. I thought she was getting better." Mrs. Carter stepped forward and, to Helena's surprise, placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Miss Porter, I can see how much you love Ava. That's not in question. But those burns need professional medical care. The paramedics are going to take both of you to the hospital now, and they're going to make sure Ava gets the treatment she needs." Helena nodded, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. "I don't have insurance. I don't know how I'm going to pay for this. I barely make enough to cover rent and food, but I don't care. I'll figure it out. I'll work extra shifts. I'll do whatever I have to do." "We'll worry about that later," Principal Morrison said firmly. "Right now, let's focus on getting Ava the care she needs." The paramedics began moving Ava toward the stretcher they'd brought in. Helena walked alongside, holding her daughter's hand, murmuring reassurances and apologies. Just before they reached the door, Ava looked back at Mrs. Carter. "Mrs. Carter, will you come visit me?" Mrs. Carter felt her throat tighten with emotion. "Of course I will, sweetheart. As soon as they say you can have visitors, I'll be there. I promise." Ava managed a small smile, the first genuine smile Mrs. Carter had seen from her all day. And then they were gone. The paramedics guiding the stretcher down the hallway, Helena walking beside it, her hand never leaving her daughter's. The classroom fell silent. Mrs. Carter sank into her desk chair, suddenly feeling utterly exhausted. Nurse Bennett sat down beside her, and Principal Morrison leaned against a student desk. None of them spoke for a long moment, each processing what they had just witnessed. Finally, Principal Morrison broke the silence. "I'll need to make the call to CPS. We don't have a choice about that. We're mandated reporters." Mrs. Carter nodded, understanding but dreading the implications. "I know. But when you make that call, please make it clear that this wasn't intentional harm. This was an accident, and a mother who was too afraid and too poor to seek proper help. They need support, not punishment." "I'll make that very clear," Principal Morrison assured her. "And I'm going to contact our school social worker. We have resources, programs that can help families in situations like this. Helena shouldn't have to choose between her job and her child's health. No parent should." Nurse Bennett stood and began packing up her medical kit. "Those burns are going to take weeks to heal properly, maybe months. That child is going to need follow-up care, medication, proper dressings, and Helena is going to need help managing all of that." "Then we'll help her," Mrs. Carter said, a note of steel entering her voice. "We'll figure out how to help them. Because that little girl in there deserves better than this, and her mother deserves support, not condemnation." Over the following days, Mrs. Carter found herself unable to stop thinking about Ava and Helena. She made phone calls to the hospital to check on Ava's condition. The nurses couldn't give her detailed medical information due to privacy laws, but they could tell her that Ava was receiving treatment, that she was stable, and that her mother hadn't left her side. On the third day, Mrs. Carter drove to the hospital after school with a small bag of items she thought Ava might enjoy. A stuffed teddy bear, some coloring books and crayons, a few picture books from her classroom library. When she arrived at the pediatric wing and asked about Ava Porter, the nurse smiled. "Oh, you must be the teacher. Ava has been asking about you. Room 314, down the hall and to the right." Mrs. Carter found the room and knocked softly before entering. Ava was lying on her stomach in the hospital bed, her back covered in proper medical dressings. There was an IV in her arm, and monitors beeping softly nearby. Helena was sitting in a chair beside the bed, looking exhausted but more peaceful than she had in the school. When Ava saw Mrs. Carter, her whole face lit up. "Mrs. Carter, you came? You really came?" Mrs. Carter walked over to the bed, her eyes filling with tears at the sight of this brave little girl. "Of course I came, sweetheart. I promised, didn't I? And I always keep my promises. How are you feeling?" "So much better," Ava said, and there was genuine wonder in her voice. "The doctors gave me special medicine for the pain, and they cleaned my back and put on new bandages that don't hurt. And the nurses are so nice. One of them brought me ice cream." Mrs. Carter laughed through her tears and placed the bag of gifts on the bedside table. "I brought you some things to keep you busy while you're here." Ava's eyes widened as Mrs. Carter pulled out the teddy bear, the books, and the crayons. She clutched the bear to her chest with delight. "Thank you, Mrs. Carter. Thank you so much." Helena stood up from her chair, and Mrs. Carter noticed how fragile she looked, how the weight of everything was still pressing down on her shoulders. "Mrs. Carter, I don't know how to thank you for what you did. If you hadn't noticed, if you hadn't checked, if you hadn't called for help, I don't want to think about what might have happened. The doctors said another few days and the infection could have spread. She could have become very sick." Mrs. Carter reached out and took Helena's hand. "You don't need to thank me. I was just doing what any teacher would do, what any person who cares should do. But I do want you to know that you're not alone in this. The school wants to help. We have resources, connections to programs that can assist with medical bills, food assistance, even help with housing costs. You don't have to carry all of this by yourself." Helena's eyes filled with tears, and she gripped Mrs. Carter's hand tightly. "I've been so scared, of losing my job, of losing Ava, of not being able to provide for her. I thought asking for help would make me look weak, would make them think I couldn't take care of my own child." Mrs. Carter shook her head firmly. "Asking for help doesn't make you weak. It makes you strong. It means you're putting your daughter's needs first, which is exactly what a good mother does. And you are a good mother, Helena. What happened with the stove was an accident. What matters now is that Ava gets better and that we make sure nothing like this happens again." A social worker from the hospital, a woman named Jennifer Reyes, entered the room a few minutes later. She had kind eyes and a clipboard full of paperwork. After introducing herself to Mrs. Carter, she turned to Helena with a reassuring smile. "Ms. Porter, I've been working with Child Protective Services on Ava's case. I want you to know that after reviewing everything, the accident report, the medical findings, statements from the school, and speaking with you, CPS has determined that this was an accidental injury. There's no indication of abuse or intentional neglect. However, they do want to work with you to ensure you have the resources and support you need to keep Ava safe and healthy." Helena let out a breath she seemed to have been holding for days. "So you're not taking her away from me?" "No, Miss Porter, we're not taking your daughter away, but we are going to connect you with some community resources. There's a program that can help with your utility costs, including getting that kerosene stove replaced with a safer electric one. We can also help you apply for emergency Medicaid to cover Ava's medical expenses, and there are organizations that provide assistance with rent and food costs for families in crisis." Helena covered her face with her hands and began to cry, but these were tears of relief, tears of gratitude. Mrs. Carter moved closer and put an arm around her shoulders while Jennifer continued. "You're going to get through this. Both of you are, and you're not going to have to do it alone." Over the next week, Ava remained in the hospital while her burns received intensive treatment. The doctors were pleased with how well she was responding to proper medical care. The infections were clearing up, the wounds were beginning to heal, and Ava's spirits were remarkably high. Mrs. Carter visited 3 more times, each time bringing small gifts and stories about what was happening in the classroom. She told Ava how all the other students had made get-well cards for her, how they asked about her every day, how they couldn't wait for her to come back. Meanwhile, Principal Morrison had initiated something remarkable. She had called an emergency meeting of the PTA and explained Ava's situation, carefully, respectfully, maintaining the family's privacy while conveying the need. The response from the Marigold Valley elementary community was overwhelming. Within 48 hours, parents had organized a fundraiser. They collected money, gift cards to grocery stores, clothing for both Ava and Helena, school supplies, and even furniture when they learned the family's apartment was sparsely furnished. A local electrician who had 2 children at the school volunteered to install a new electric stove in the Porter apartment, free of charge. A pediatrician who was also a school parent offered to provide follow-up care for Ava's burns at no cost. The outpouring of support was so substantial that Helena broke down in tears multiple times, overwhelmed by the kindness of people who had been strangers just days before. Mrs. Carter coordinated much of this effort, working late into the evenings, making phone calls, organizing donations, ensuring everything reached the family. She felt it was the least she could do. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Ava standing in that classroom, suffering in silence, too afraid to ask for help. It haunted her and motivated her in equal measure. 2 weeks after the incident, Ava was discharged from the hospital. The doctors provided detailed instructions for wound care, prescribed pain medication and antibiotics, and scheduled follow-up appointments. Helena, who had managed to negotiate a temporary modified work schedule with her employers after intervention from the hospital social worker, felt more hopeful than she had in years. But Ava wasn't quite ready to return to school. She needed another week at home to continue healing, to adjust to the new routines of wound care, to regain her strength. During that time, Mrs. Carter visited the Porter apartment twice, bringing homework packets so Ava wouldn't fall behind, but more importantly, bringing companionship and encouragement. The apartment was small but clean, a 1-bedroom in an older building on the edge of town. Helena had given Ava the bedroom while she slept on a couch in the living room. The walls were bare except for a few of Ava's crayon drawings taped up with care. It was the home of people doing their absolute best with very little, and Mrs. Carter felt a deep respect for the dignity Helena maintained despite their circumstances. On her second visit, Mrs. Carter brought something special, a photo album filled with pictures from the classroom. She sat with Ava on the couch. Ava was finally able to sit for short periods now, and they looked through the images together. There were photos of the other students working on art projects, playing at recess, reading in the library corner. Ava pointed at each of her classmates, remembering their names, asking Mrs. Carter questions about what they'd been doing. "Do they still remember me?" Ava asked quietly. Mrs. Carter laughed and hugged the little girl gently. "Remember you? Ava, they talk about you every single day. They ask when you're coming back. They save you a seat at the reading carpet. They even made you a special welcome back banner that's hanging in our classroom right now." Ava's eyes widened with delight and disbelief. "Really? They did that for me? Really and truly? You're part of our classroom family, Ava. We've missed you so much." 3.5 weeks after that first terrible morning, Ava returned to school. Helena walked her daughter to the classroom, both of them nervous but hopeful. Ava was wearing a brand new outfit from the donations. Her hair was neatly braided, and though she still moved carefully, there was a lightness to her step that hadn't been there before. When they entered the classroom, the entire class erupted in cheers and applause. The "Welcome Back Ava" banner hung across the back wall, decorated with handprints and drawings from every student. Children rushed forward, eager to greet their returned classmate, but Mrs. Carter gently reminded them to be careful, that Ava was still healing, and they needed to be gentle. Mrs. Carter had arranged Ava's desk with special cushioning on the chair, making it comfortable for her to sit without putting pressure on her healing wounds. She'd also created a special comfort station in the back corner with pillows where Ava could stand or lie down if sitting became uncomfortable. But what touched Helena most was the folder on Ava's desk labeled "We Missed You," filled with letters and drawings from every child in the class. Helena knelt down beside her daughter, tears streaming down her face as she took in the warmth and acceptance surrounding them. "See, baby? See how many people care about you? You're not alone. We're not alone anymore." Ava threw her arms around her mother's neck, careful of her back, and whispered, "I love you, Mama. Thank you for being brave, too." Mrs. Carter had to turn away for a moment to compose herself. When she turned back, Helena was standing, and the two women embraced. "Thank you," Helena whispered. "Thank you for seeing her. Thank you for not giving up. Thank you for helping us." "Thank you for trusting me," Mrs. Carter replied. "And thank you for being the mother Ava needs. You're stronger than you know, Helena." As the day progressed, Mrs. Carter watched Ava with careful attention, but what she saw filled her heart with joy. Ava sat comfortably during morning lessons, participated in story time from the carpet, and during art class, she worked at the table with the other children, laughing and chatting as if she'd never been away. She still moved carefully, still had moments where Mrs. Carter could tell she was managing discomfort, but the haunted, fearful look was gone from her eyes. She looked like what she was, a 5-year-old girl who was healing, who was safe, who was loved. During recess, Mrs. Carter stood at the window and watched Ava play on the playground. She wasn't running or climbing yet, doctor's orders, but she was sitting on a bench with 3 other little girls, all of them giggling over something, their heads close together in the way children do when sharing secrets. The sight made Mrs. Carter smile through tears she didn't bother to hide. Principal Morrison joined her at the window. "That's a good sight," she said quietly. "It's the best sight," Mrs. Carter agreed. "Do you know I almost didn't push that first day? When Ava refused to sit, part of me thought, don't be overbearing. Maybe she's just anxious. Give her space." I'm so grateful I didn't listen to that voice. I'm so grateful I trusted my instincts. "Your instincts saved that child's life," Principal Morrison said firmly. "The doctors said another week, and she could have developed sepsis. You did more than notice, Lillian. You acted. You cared enough to see past the surface, to look deeper. That's what great teachers do." As the months passed, Ava continued to heal. The burns left some scarring, but nothing that would limit her movement or cause ongoing pain. The doctors were pleased with her recovery, attributing it to her young age, resilient body, and finally receiving proper treatment. But Mrs. Carter knew there were other scars, invisible ones, that would take longer to heal: the trauma of the accident, the memory of hiding her pain, the fear of being taken from her mother. Mrs. Carter made sure Ava had access to the school counselor, Mrs. Raymond, a gentlewoman who specialized in childhood trauma. Ava met with her once a week, sometimes just to talk, sometimes to draw pictures of her feelings, sometimes to learn coping strategies for when memories of the accident resurfaced. Helena attended some of these sessions too, learning how to support her daughter through the healing process. The community support didn't stop after Ava's return to school. The relationships formed during the crisis deepened into genuine friendships. Helena became part of the school's parent volunteer program, helping in the library during her days off. Other parents invited her and Ava to play dates and birthday parties. Slowly, the isolation that poverty often brings began to lift, replaced by connection and community. 6 months after that terrible morning, Mrs. Carter organized a special classroom celebration. It wasn't for any holiday or birthday, it was simply called Celebration of Courage Day. She had the students work on a project about bravery, asking them to think about times when they or someone they knew had been brave. The children created posters, wrote stories, drew pictures. When it came time to share, Ava raised her hand. Mrs. Carter felt her heart skip a beat, wondering if this would be too difficult for the child. But Ava stood up confidently and walked to the front of the class. She had drawn a picture of herself holding her mother's hand, both of them surrounded by hearts. "I want to talk about my mama," Ava said in a clear voice. "She's the bravest person I know. When something scary happened to us, she took care of me even though she was scared too. She worked really hard to make sure I was okay, and when we needed help, she was brave enough to accept it. My mama taught me that being brave doesn't mean you're not scared. It means you keep going even when you are scared, and that asking for help is brave too." There wasn't a dry eye in the room. Mrs. Carter had to press her hand to her mouth to keep from sobbing. Helena, who had been invited to the celebration, was crying openly in the back of the classroom. When Ava finished, the entire class applauded, and Mrs. Carter pulled her into a gentle hug. "I'm so proud of you, Ava. You are one of the bravest people I've ever known." The school year continued, marked by normal elementary school milestones, holiday concerts, field trips, science fairs. Ava thrived academically and socially. She made friends easily, her natural kindness and empathy making her popular with her classmates. She loved reading and art, and Mrs. Carter often found her in the classroom library corner during free time, absorbed in picture books about faraway places and fantastic adventures. Helena's life stabilized too. With the new electric stove and the utility assistance program, her home was safer and her bills more manageable. She had been able to reduce her work schedule from 3 jobs to 2, giving her more time with Ava. The emergency Medicaid had covered Ava's medical expenses, and a local nonprofit had even helped Helena enroll in a job training program that would eventually allow her to pursue better employment opportunities. But more than the practical improvements, what changed most profoundly was Helena's sense of hope. She no longer felt like she was drowning, no longer felt like she had to face every challenge alone. She had learned that accepting help wasn't weakness, it was wisdom, and she had discovered a community that saw her not as a charity case, but as a neighbor, a friend, a valued member of their school family. On the last day of the school year, as parents arrived to pick up their children and collect the artwork and projects accumulated over the months, Helena lingered after most families had left. Ava was showing Mrs. Carter a butterfly she'd spotted on the playground, chattering excitedly about its colors. Helena watched them together, this teacher who had changed everything, and her daughter who was happy, healthy, and whole. When Ava finally skipped off to look at the class fish tank one last time, Helena approached Mrs. Carter. "I never got to properly thank you," Helena said softly. "Not just for that day, but for everything since, for seeing us, for treating us with dignity, for helping me understand that needing help doesn't make me a failure as a mother." Mrs. Carter took Helena's hands in hers. "You were never a failure, Helena. You were a mother doing everything you possibly could with the resources you had. What happened, all the good that came from it, that happened because you loved your daughter enough to let people help. That takes extraordinary courage." Helena smiled through her tears. "Ava starts first grade in the fall. I can hardly believe it. Sometimes I look at her running and playing, sitting and learning, being a normal, happy kid. And I remember that morning when you called me at work. I remember thinking my world was ending. But it wasn't ending. It was beginning. Does that make sense?" "Perfect sense," Mrs. Carter said. Sometimes the worst moments lead to the best changes. They embraced, two women bound together by a crisis that had transformed into connection, by pain that had blossomed into community, by fear that had given way to hope. As Helena and Ava walked out of the classroom hand in hand, Ava turned back one more time and waved. "See you next year, Mrs. Carter." Mrs. Carter waved back, smiling. "See you next year, sweet girl." As she watched them walk down the hallway, Mrs. Carter reflected on everything that had happened. She thought about how easy it would have been to dismiss Ava's behavior as mere anxiety or stubbornness. She thought about how a less observant teacher might have simply insisted the child sit without ever discovering the pain she was hiding. She thought about how close they had come to a tragedy. But she also thought about the resilience of children, the power of community, and the profound impact that comes from simply paying attention, really paying attention, to the children in our care. Sometimes the bravest children are the ones who say nothing, who smile through their pain, who protect their families even at great cost to themselves. And sometimes the most important thing an adult can do is notice. If this story touched your heart, we'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever encountered a situation where someone was hiding their pain? How did you respond? Your stories and reflections help build a community of compassion and awareness. And if you found value in this story, please consider liking this video and subscribing to our channel. Hit that notification bell so you never miss stories that matter. Stories about real people, real challenges, and real hope. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it, someone who works with children, or anyone who believes in the power of noticing and caring. Mrs. Carter returned to her desk and sat down in the quiet classroom, surrounded by empty chairs and colorful bulletin boards. In the silence, she whispered a prayer of gratitude for instinct, for courage, for second chances, and for a little girl named Ava who had taught her that sometimes the most important lessons don't come from teachers, but from the students we are privileged to serve. The afternoon sun streamed through the windows, casting long shadows across the floor where Ava had once stood, refusing to sit, hiding wounds that no child should ever have to bear alone. But that was then. Now there was only healing, hope, and the promise of tomorrow. And that, Mrs. Carter thought as she gathered her things and prepared to leave for the summer, was everything.